Reddit, what are some deep dark secrets your family members tried to hide from you, but you found out anyway? My grandma and step-grandpa had eloped long before their actual wedding ceremony. Apparently neither of their families wanted them to get married because of a difference of race. My grandma was Filipino and my step-grandpa was white. So they waited a couple of years for everyone to approve. After my grandma passed away, I had to go through her things and found their certificate of marriage from Vegas, which was certified over a year before the actual day they got married with friends and family as witnesses. I had asked my parents about it, and they had no idea. Apparently neither did anyone else in the family. It doesn't seem like such a dark secret now, but since they kept it to themselves and took it to their graves, it must have been a pretty big deal to them. It's mostly just a sweet story to me, and as someone who had lost all faith in romance, it was kind of encouraging. I may have 2 or 3 dead older brothers. I really don't know any more about it beyond that, as literally nobody in my family will talk about it with me. All I know is my grandmother on my mom's side has a picture sitting in the frame of a mirror that hangs on the wall of her house. This picture is of my grandmother and 2 boys who were between 5 to 8 years old that I'd never met or heard anybody talk about. The picture had always been in that exact location as long as I could remember. One day when I was young, I was at her house and happened to be looking at the picture while my grandmother was in the next room. She came in to see what I was doing since I had gotten quiet, and I asked her who the kids were in the picture with her. She told me they were my brothers and that there was a 3rd who wasn't in the picture. I then, thinking I had 3 older brothers, excitedly asked her where they were and why I had never met them. She just walked away and ignored the question. Any attempts after that to ask her or anybody else about the picture or the kids in it has been ignored in the same manner. I kinda gave up asking, since even my parents would ignore it. Edit, to everybody saying I should dig deeper. There's a reason I don't want to. More than likely they died in a car accident caused by my alcoholic father that nearly left my mom paralyzed from the neck down. All she's ever told me about it is that it happened in her mid to late 20s. That her and my dad were in the car. My dad was drunk driving, and they had an accident. She woke up in the hospital unable to move, with the doctor saying she'd probably be that way the rest of her life. The next morning, when she awoke, she found that she was able to move normally, but that her neck hurt like hell. To this day her neck still hurts, and when viewed from behind it almost appears as if one of her neck vertebrae was spun 90 degrees. Any doctor she's gone to has said the only cure would be to fuse the vertebrae, and she'd rather keep her range of motion and deal with the pain than have part of her neck fused. While it might be nice to know more about the lost brothers, if my inference is correct, then I'd rather not force my mom to relive the possibility of her losing them thanks to my drunken prick of a father's carelessness. He's already put her in permanent pain. I don't wish to add to it. My uncle was a huge drug dealer and banking major money. He ended up getting killed by some cartel when I was 9. Family told me he died fishing. I guess you could say he's sleeping with the fishes. I was talking to my mom and somehow we go to the topic of why I've never met anyone from her family. She explained that her older brother tried to rape her on several occasions and her mom and dad remained in denial about it, even in the face of evidence, forever after. She never told anyone else about it after her parents blew her off, including my dad. I found my mother after a suicide attempt, and I'm the only person in the family that knows about it. I watch too many crime shows. I was definitely expecting you to tell us that your uncle murdered your aunt and she was stashed in the fridge. My mother owns over 10 buildings and didn't want to tell me in case I start becoming corrupt and money hungry. My uncle told me this. Edit, the Monopoly jokes is why I love Reddit. Also, to those curious, apparently, from my uncle again, 8 of the buildings are to be given to be in her will. When I was 17, my family finally decided to break it to me that my birth was the result of my mother cheating on my dad. That my dad bailed on me when I was 8 because he found out that he was born sterile, so it was impossible for me to be his. And that I'm darker than everyone in my white family because I'm actually half Filipino. When I was 18, I found out by accident that my mother was a meth user. Hit me hard like a truck and about 3 weeks after I found out the depression was too intense to carry. So I sit down and talk to my grandmother. As soon as my mouth opens, my throat tightened up and the floodgates opened. I finally got it all out and asked. She was stunned. I didn't know, but I thought the way she had acted all my life was normal. My grandmother then tells me that my dad used it just as much. My dad died when I was 2 and I never knew him, especially that he was addicted to such a serious drug. Lastly, I've also learned that one of my 2 uncles is a frequent meth user. At least I know I will never touch that shit. That my dad didn't die randomly in his sleep. He committed suicide. See. One of my grandfathers ran a brothel in El Salvador. He was murdered in Texas, and one of his lesbian daughters now runs that same brothel. When I visited El Salvador as a kid, my mom told me to avoid a particular street on the eastern part of town. It wasn't until a couple of years ago that she told me why. My mother didn't want kids, so my father threatened to divorce her. Filed the paperwork and everything, but she called him over one last time. And well, here I am. Secret family in Japan. Apparently, my American dad left the army having unwittingly impregnated his Japanese GF. She sent a letter, but my grandma intercepted it and tore it up. He didn't find out for years. Now there's a whole mess of half Jewish, half Japanese folks related to me. A few years after my father died, I learned that my dad have been visiting those gay sex places in the woods or at parking places where you can just hook up with random guys and have sex. If there's a name for those places, I'm sorry, I'm not aware. He was HIV positive and even kept it a secret from my mom for a couple of years while still having unprotected sex with her. When my mom found out, she was furious, but luckily she didn't have HIV. The only thing I remembered was my parents having a huge argument at some point, and that I was really scared they were going to get divorced. They stayed together for the kids. And to be honest, aside from the fights, sometimes I always had great parents and we would have a lot of good family times. My mom must have had a really hard time then. Well, my dad must have had a hard time too. But they still did a great job raising their kids. After my father died, my mom told me everything when I was about 16, and I was so shocked that I had to hear it a couple of times because I just blocked it the first few times. She kept it from me because she didn't want me to hate my dad. The funny thing is, my mom is now married to a woman, so I guess you could say both my parents were gay. I'm sorry for any spelling mistakes or weird sentences. English is not my native language. My mom poisoned me on at least 3 or 4 different occasions. On purpose. She would usually undercook some food hoping I would die of food poisoning. I'm guessing. No idea if she added anything. I got suspicious when I ate some salmonella chicken. I was young and starving, and later overheard her telling my brother not to eat them and that they were for me. She made a big batch of chicken, as she usually does. Some pieces seemed fine, so I ate them, and not the funny smelling ones. Still got sick, but I got better. According to my uncle, on his deathbed, he claimed to have walked into the house with my father to find her drowning me in the tub. Then there was that one time she almost shot me. That was an accident though. I was chasing my dog because he got off the chain and rounded a corner just as she fired. We was outside. The dog ran down the street. The bullet hit a tree a few feet away from me. We caught him later, and she shot him anyway and told me he died of fleas. I had to bury his bleeding corpse. My dad is a douche who ducks his sister. 2 things. 1. I have an uncle in France. A parting gift from my grandfather to a very pretty young girl that he helped protect from Germans during WWII. 2. My mother came very close to marrying her first cousin until their grandmother let them know who they were dating. I grew up thinking that my 2 brothers were my only siblings. However, I found out recently, I'm 31, that my dad had been cheating on my mom before my parents were married. The other woman was married, though, and when she got pregnant by my father, she deceived everyone and raised the girl as if she were the product of a healthy marriage. My parents married shortly after that, and 2 years later, I was born. The kicker, though, My half-sister and I grew up together as friends. We knew each other in school, and neither of us had any idea that we were siblings. TL. Doctor, my dad was a slut, and my childhood friend turned out to be my sister. We all knew my father used to be a triad gangster. Every time we had family events, when I was young, there would be a lot of uncles about, and normal people who lived near us would always avoid us, never look us in the eye, and be extra courteous. Hell, when I was young, I didn't have a lot of friends because all the kids' parents feared my dad. I never knew why they were scared of him until I overheard him on the phone one day in 1992. My father has always been very quiet about what he does / his role in the organization that he worked for, and I could understand why. From what I gathered after listening to the conversation on the phone, he was some sort of enforcer. Someone had snitched on the location of their drug warehouses or factories in China and they knew who snitched. They had him. And my father just said make it very slow and find his family. You know what to do. Apostrophe. After listening in on that conversation, I couldn't even look my dad in the eye for a few weeks. But he's no longer part of the organization and he's retired. Still, sometimes he's scary. TL. Dr. Father was a high-ranking gangster in Hong Kong who did shady stuff. Wouldn't really say this is anything dark. However, growing up I thought my family was awesome and we all loved each other. Shit was fantastic. However, I start to get into my teen years and this doesn't seem the case anymore. My dad's parents don't seem as close, and I began to feel like they looked down upon me and maybe my mum. Well, not long into my teens I find out my dad's parents hate my mum. My nan wrote a letter to my dad before their wedding telling him not to marry her. So now I understand that actually, these big happy family events I thought were happening were all fake. Now whenever my dad's parents are over I can't help but thinking this is all fake shit. You all hate each other. Why are we bothering to pretend? Apostrophe. I'm sure my grandparents love me, but I can't stand how false everything has become. Let's see. When I was 12 or so I found a suitcase of gay porn, videos, and mags under my dad's bed. I found out that one of my uncles had killed himself following a certain amount of incest between the other siblings. My sister was raped while at university. Another friend, a musician, disappeared in the genocide. He was rounded up along with some 100 other Tutsi youths when the Tutsis were invading from Uganda and simply vanished. A cousin, not by blood, was convicted of genocide in Rwanda. My half-sister, my dad was prolific, tried to steal all my father's money, and ended up becoming his favorite child. I've successfully hidden most of my dark secrets from my family. My great-grandmother was outside with her 2-year-old sister. This was in the 30s. She was watching her while her dad was out in the field working and whatnot. So, my grandma's little sister got annoying, so she got a huge stick and beat her nearly to death. She got sent to an insane asylum. My mother claims that my father is some man who disappeared when she got pregnant. She won't give me a name or anything. My entire life, she's only referred to him as your father and refused to elaborate. Recently though, my aunt made it clear that this isn't true. We were having dinner. Each of us had a few cocktails, and my aunt said that the whole story was just ridiculous. She said my mother made herself the victim of the story because she was so ashamed of the truth. I still don't know the truth, but at least I know that my father isn't some mysterious man who blew in and out of town. I'm one of 4 siblings. My parents had planned on 3 kids, and the 4th was my mom's last-ditch attempt at a girl. She deceived my dad into thinking that she was still using contraception. She confided this to my ex-GF, who was murdered. So I may be the only one who knows the secret, other than my mom. But life has a sense of humor. My youngest sibling turned out to be another boy. They didn't keep this a secret, but when I was younger I had a second cousin who was very intelligent. I remember he would always get on peg left at that game at the Cracker Barrel every time. He also really loved Stephen King novels. As time went on it turned out he was a schizophrenic, and he was admitted to a mental hospital. He ended up escaping and killed himself by being hit by a train. My great-grandpa's youngest brother was really his nephew. His sister got pregnant at 15 in the 1930s, and they lived in a super conservative area. So they tried to pass the kid off as her brother. Kinda like the empty child. During my parents' divorce, when I was 3, my dad offered my mom a one-time payment of $15,000 or so for us to walk out of his life and never deal with him again. He was trying to get out of paying child support, and my mother's lawyer told her to record every phone conversation with my father to be used against him. I found out when I was about 12 or so because I was looking for blank cassette tapes to make radio mixtapes and found a huge stash under my mother's bed. The first one I picked up was that conversation and queued up to be played for the judge. TL, doctor, my dad is sort of a dick. My mom tried to commit suicide when she was 18 by jumping from a 2-story parking garage. She broke dozens of bones and is now littered with steel plates and screws under the skin. As a kid, I assumed that was just normal and eventually I would get some metal bones too. Until my grandma asked how my mom's past injuries felt in the winter. She was asking if she had arthritis from the injuries. Specifically, I had to ask my mom about it, and I have never viewed her the same since. As a 13-year-old that had just begun taking antidepressants and therapy, it hit the softest of soft spots. I used to think she was basically a pillar, being a single mom and working 2 jobs to scrape by and all that. Now she just seems so fragile. I'm sincerely terrified of her attempting again. I never want to see go like that. She deserves better. My mother's monitor would be always turned in a way that I could not see what is on it, but she did not realize everything did reflect clearly in the glass behind her. This way I had to discover that she watched some really weird and messed up porn. Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit universe.